Alright, 3.1 definition. So first off, let's make a distinction between a statistic versus a parameter. Statistic comes from sampling, right? Notice the S's match. And parameters come from the population. So when you take a sample, you are going to be estimating the middle of the data, such as the mean. You might be talking about the spread of the data for the standard deviation or the variance. You also should talk about what your sample size in, lowercase n, or if you're talking about percentages or proportions, p hat. Now, on the other side of that, when you're talking about the entirety of a population, you're dealing with parameters. Parameters include the mean of the population, and here's the Greek letter mu. It's kind of U-shaped, but with the tail at the beginning. There is the variance and the standard deviation of the population, and here I'm using a lowercase sigma, not to get confused with uppercase sigma, but we'll deal with that later in like the next slide. The total size of the population, if it's countable, capital N, versus uppercase P, not to get confused with P hat, what we use for statistic, which is the percentage for the entire population. Alright, so again, X bar and mu are used for the mean. X bar, that's X with a line on top of it, is the sample mean, versus mu, the Greek letter, which looks like a U with a tail at the beginning, is the population mean. Next up, you have the standard deviation, which I will abbreviate S dot D at times, or just say standard deviation, and that's lowercase s for the sample statistic versus sigma for the population parameter. Similarly, you have the variance, abbreviated var, and the variance is the standard deviation squared, whether it's a statistic, so S squared is the sample variance, and sigma squared is the population variance. When you can count your data, which you should always be able to do for a sample, it's lowercase n, and for a population it's uppercase n, although that's kind of iffy depending on the book you're using. But it's going to be the size. And lastly, later on we'll talk about proportions, and when you're estimating on proportions, super popular this year with elections, proportions. And it's P hat, that's P with the little hat on top of it, versus uppercase P. P with the hat is a statistic, so it's the sample proportion. Uppercase P is a parameter, it's the population.